I want to tell you a quick story about how this came to be, because if you've listened to Working with Feeling, you know that working with feeling, developing practices that support our nervous system, emotional regulation, it's not just about sitting somewhere on a soft couch and naming what we feel in the body. Developing nervous system capacity, expanding our window of tolerance so that we can show up in the world and contribute in the world the way we intend, is also a very physical practice. An important part of the work that I do incorporates hand-eye coordination, balance, ways of supporting our nervous system and reconnecting to its innate capability that we can easily disconnect from in modern life. So recently I was having this lonely moment of like, who else is doing this kind of stuff in this way? Who is connecting the gentle, slow, trauma-informedness with the work that goes into developing neurologically? And I've encountered people along the way who have sort of been doing this kind of thing, but not really. And I've done searches here and there to see who else is doing some interesting things in this area. And one day I had the idea, let me ask AI to scour the internet and look for this person for me. So I hopped onto Perplexity AI. I gave it this very long set of instructions of what I was looking for. And lo and behold, who pops up but our guest today. Elisabeth and I met up in Austin for some coffee, or matcha rather, and it didn't take long to recognize the deep value and power of the work that Elisabeth is bringing to the table. Elisabeth is an expert in applied neurology and somatic practices. She's the host of the Apple Top 100 podcast, Trauma Rewired. And she's been involved in neuro and movement-based therapies since 2007, before it was cool on Instagram, with a focus on the intersection of complex trauma and nervous system regulation. Elisabeth is the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification Program. You'll hear her refer to that as NSI, Neurosomatic Intelligence. And she is also the founder of brainbased.com, an online community that uses applied neurology and somatics for nervous system health, emotional expression, and resilience. So enjoy this conversation with Elisabeth Kristof and let me know what you think.
There's a little bit of a commitment there to having a daily practice of working with your nervous system the same way you would work out or you would brush your teeth, spending some time every day caring for the health and the functioning of your nervous system. But I think it does help when people start to connect the dots of, oh, this is really important because this is my operating system. This drives my behavior, how I experience the world, my relationship patterns, my ability to connect with other people.
So if your game, I would love to start with connecting the physical component to the nervous system and to the mental, where I think a lot of people associate nervous system with brain. So we have to do mental exercises to support it. And to me, this is the missing piece in so much somatic work, so much nervous system regulation work, is the more physical movement exercise component.
Yeah. So if we're going to talk about nervous system health and emotional regulation in NSI, we're really looking at inputs first. How does our body take in information about the world around us? And then how does our brain interpret that information? And then what output is produced? And so most of the inputs are coming in through my body, through my peripheral nervous system, also through my eyes and my vestibular system, the balance system in my inner ear, but also through my sensations of touch, my movement abilities, my proprioceptive map. And so if I really want to have a healthy, well-functioning nervous system, it's not about just training my prefrontal cortex. So much of what's happening in our life experience is going on in those more subconscious areas of the brain and the brainstem and our autonomic reflexes. And so much of it is driven by how am I taking in information about the world around me through my different sensory input systems. And so to really create change there, we have to start to work with those input systems and then start to work with how our brain interprets those inputs. And then we can get a new output rather than just cognitively trying to override whatever output we're experiencing.
Yeah. And this is where we make the distinction when it comes to the role that, let's say, thoughts and beliefs play in behavior change and sustained change when it comes to our patterns, is we're addressing effectively the autonomic functioning of our body that we're not addressing if we're purely speaking to the cognitive level.
Yeah, when we think about beliefs, I like to think about beliefs and emotional experiences more like neurotags, neural networks. So there's not just a cognitive component, there's an emotional component, and emotions are a very physiological thing that happen in our body. They're changes to our breathing, to our muscle patterns. They are chemical reactions that happen inside of the body. So they're definitely not just our thoughts. They're a whole physiological experience. So there's a cognitive component, an emotional component, and there's a physical component. There's changes to my heart rate, my respiration, the way I move. And so every belief is not, it's not just the thoughts that I'm thinking. It's a whole neurotag that's happening in multiple areas of my brain. And then that is creating many changes in my body. And then those become new inputs. Like the changes that happen in my body, it's always happening in a loop. So I have a thought, it creates a reaction in the body, and then those reactions become new inputs that are coming up to my brain that then affect the thoughts and the interpretation, generates a new output. The output becomes the input. And so all of these things are working together to create the experience. And so we really can't create a lot of sustainable change if we're just focusing on the cognitive, because those other areas of the brain and the body that are taking in information, they don't respond to our cognitive thoughts. They respond to sensory inputs.
It's very wide. There are many layers involved at any given point in time. And this is where, sometimes I get too excited about speaking to some of those layers underneath without acknowledging first that, let's take the mindfulness movement maybe as a starting point, where there's so much benefit that does come from, for example, bringing more awareness to our exteroception, to our seeing, our tasting, our smelling, our touch. These things that does help us orient. It helps us access a sense of safety. And for many of us, that's a really important first step. And then there's also proprioception and interoception, where we begin to address some of the other layers underneath that you're describing. So what does that bring up for you, maybe just as a starting point?
Yeah. So what you mentioned is really important. There's all these different types of ways that we are taking in information about the world outside of us, around us, and inside of us, right? Our proprioception is where our body is in space. Our interoception, what's going on inside of our body. Our exteroception, what's going on in our external environment. And our brain is taking in all of that data all of the time and using it to orient and also to make predictions, to decide what to do next. And so I can have deficits in any one of those systems, maybe multiple deficits. Maybe it's hard to know where my body is. Maybe it's hard to feel inside of myself. And all of these deficits, they add up to compound our stress because our brain really relies on that information to make predictions, to generate outputs, to keep us alive. So when we're thinking about what do we do to start to be healthy, to create change in our nervous system, to be able to regulate our emotions, it's really important to look at all of those different layers and realize that everybody's nervous system is unique and different. We all have different deficits or areas that need rehabilitation. And how do I start to find that out for myself and begin to rehab that so that I can process emotions or start to create change in my beliefs or have new reactions or be under less stress all of the time? There's never just one input system that we want to look at. It's a holistic, integrated process.
This to me is the major jump when we're going from looking at personal growth, leadership, emotional regulation, emotional intelligence as addressing the way we're thinking about the world, our internal thoughts, to encompassing the entirety of our interaction with our sensed world and our own inner world, where it is a very significant jump. There are innumerable schools and methodologies and approaches that are predicated upon addressing primarily, if not exclusively, the way we're thinking about our world. And so it can easily seem overwhelming, I think, to a lot of people as they're beginning to recognize some of what you're describing. There's so much going on that in my day-to-day life, I'm not even paying attention to at all. And you're telling me this is actually what's core to being able to create sustainable change. And I've been going from modality to modality and experience to experience, and nothing has been sticking. Why should I, first of all, why should I believe this is maybe one part of the question. And the second part, going back to when I was doing some research before our conversation, I came across a really great reel on, I believe it was your Instagram or the NSI Instagram, where it spoke to some of the different exercises that you do on a daily basis in order to support that level of awareness, where I can see somebody coming in and saying, that seems like overkill. Like all of this just to be able to function as a grounded human being. And I know what I would say to that, but I'm curious what you would say.
Okay, there's so many important things to talk about here. And first is that real level of maybe overwhelm and frustration when we start to try to shift our paradigm to understand why some of the mindset work or cognitive behavioral therapy or all these things that we've been doing to try to change our behavior has maybe not been giving us the results that we want. And I actually just got an email from one of the practitioners who's taking our certification course and who works in mindset, and was both relieved and angry, because it is challenging to confront that shift. And she was like, there's so much relief in understanding why I couldn't break through these patterns, even though I work in this world and I've spent so much time on my personal development. And I feel really frustrated and overwhelmed that no one ever taught me about my nervous system, that nobody ever taught me about how my brain works and how I take in this information. And can I really start to rehabilitate all of this? It's just a whole new approach of dealing with change. And so it's a process, and it can bring a lot of relief to understand, like, man, there's other things driving my behavior. There's a reason why I haven't been able to really break through this. It's these patterned responses in my nervous system and how my brain takes in information and navigates through the world to protect me for my safety. And where do I begin with this? And then, like you were talking about the tools as well, neurotraining, neurosomatic tools, it's not like the sexiest thing to do, right? It's these really practical daily exercises that you do to start to rehabilitate the way your eyes are moving, the cranial nerves, doing tongue exercises, doing body mapping. And there's a little bit of a commitment there to having a daily practice of working with your nervous system the same way you would work out or you would brush your teeth, spending some time every day caring for the health and the functioning of your nervous system. But I think it does help when people start to connect the dots of, oh, this is really important because this is my operating system. This drives my behavior, how I experience the world, my relationship patterns, my ability to connect with other people. And so if we can keep connecting the dots back to that, there's some motivation for, man, it's worth spending like 10 minutes a day rehabilitating my nervous system, creating the skill of regulation, creating better sensory input, because truly this is the foundation from which I move through the world. And so it is worth it, even though it seems kind of tedious.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what can often come up is this feeling like humans, let's say 1,000 years ago, they probably weren't doing these neurological exercises. They were just living their lives. And yet humans today are finding that, how I would describe it at least, is that we lack the ability to adapt to the way the world has changed. And this is why we need to be doing things that humans were not likely doing in the past. What our nervous systems are exposed to as your typical human being on the planet today is on an entirely different level. And I feel like we don't give ourselves the credit for what our body has to go through in order to function in our world.
100%. There's so many aspects of modern life that are like, we live in a dysregulating world, and we start to lose a lot of the skills that we inherently have because we don't use them as much. So a lot of our visual skills start to diminish because we're looking at screens all of the time, so much exposure to blue light. Our eyes aren't moving in all the ways that they should. And neurologically, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Specific adaptation to impose demand. I'm going to train for what I want to get better at. And because of neuroplasticity, if I'm not using things regularly, those skills start to diminish. And so we have just our lifestyle. We don't get enough movement. There's not as much connection. All of these things impact our compensations, our posture, our breathing. And so we do have to spend some time rehabilitating that because our bodies really haven't adapted to our modern world. And there's also a lot of things that are compounded over time. You know, trauma is a thing that many people have, patterns our nervous system to be under higher stress, to be more reactive, to have more chronic stress load all of the time. That trauma is passed down generationally, and that stress load as well. So we start to see bigger and bigger outputs of a nervous system that's living in constant dysregulation as, you know, one kiddo grows up in a very dysregulated family and then has kids, and that dysregulation is passed down. Those patterns are passed down. And then we have big structural trauma too. We have racism and oppression and all these systems that are now kind of woven into our own neural architecture, and the repression of emotions. So many things are coming at us all the time in this world that just lead to a lot of dysregulation and health outcomes that reflect that.
I personally believe that so many of the biggest challenges we face are an effect that stems from what we're talking about here. Just the fact that the way we live is not conducive to being a grounded, healthy person with a regulated nervous system.
It's not. It's really not, you know, and it's so easy to just get caught in the day to day. And even myself, like when I'm really in work projects and I'm caught up in what I'm doing and don't make the time for my nervous system training, very quickly I'll start to recognize the outputs of my own nervous system that are starting to show up, or I'll start to notice, oh, my left eye is lagging a little bit in its movement. All of these signals that my body is sending me. I've got a little bit of pain here. My vocals aren't working as well. And I know that without that conditioning, without that care, just living in the world is going to impact the outputs that I'm experiencing and move me more into a protective mode where I am experiencing more pain or fatigue or nausea, and kind of pull me out of that presence mode where systems are running well. I have better range of motion. I'm more present with people. I can be in my body. I can feel the sensations. I can process those. Like all of these things are impacted if I'm not doing the daily maintenance.
To me, in what you're sharing, there's first is what is so valuable about this conversation and what we're naming is that we're making explicit what is the challenge we're all facing. I think sometimes it can feel kind of amorphous, like the world is just kind of gone into chaos, and we kind of have to pick like what's my lane here for how I kind of make my thing work. But when we name that this is what's happening, and one of the reasons it seems so elusive to be peaceful and grounded within ourselves in day-to-day life is because of the way our modern world is set up. So we name that. I think it can give us then a sense of greater agency where we're recognizing, to your earlier point, neuroplasticity works in both ways.
That's right.
So if we don't use certain skills, we lose them. But if we do use certain skills, we rebuild this capability, and over time expand our nervous system's capacity to be able to navigate what I refer to as the rock concert of our modern world, just the barrage of stimulation and information that we're all exposed to.
Yeah.
And that does entail, and what we're talking about here does entail, an ongoing commitment. And I'll tell my leadership coaching clients, like, this is a very rebellious act that you're doing here. You're engaging in developing a way of being that is very different from what most people are doing. And that means it's going to take daily integrating this into your day-to-day and having your practices. And that's never going to end. Contrary to what a lot of Instagram influencers will sell, there is no end point.
That's right. It really becomes a lifestyle. And like you said, it's a very rebellious act to start to unpattern these ways of being that are really deeply woven into our bodies, our brains, our nervous systems, to make that time for self-care. And neuroplasticity absolutely is neither good nor bad. It just is. So we talk in NSI a lot about like neuroplasticity is the science of hope, because it teaches us that we're changing all of the time. We're constantly adapting and responding to the stimulus that we have. And when we have some understanding of how our nervous system works, we can start to have some agency in providing the stimulus that helps us produce a positive adaptation that we want, and that can create lasting change. But again, it's neuroplasticity is neither good nor bad. And I can also be creating adaptation and change in a direction that I don't want. When I'm moving through life unaware, I'm reinforcing those patterns of creating more deficits in my input systems, creating more dysregulation. If I'm moving into pain, if I'm moving into dissociation, I'm getting better and better at producing pain. I'm getting better and better at moving into dissociation. That's becoming the more well-worn path. And so we really do have to understand that it's happening all of the time. It doesn't move in any one particular way. But when we understand how to work with that, then we can start to say, okay, these are the ways that I want to start to repattern. These are the ways that I want to create change. And then we can train for that. We can do that intentionally.
Yeah. What I found to be so interesting about doing this type of work is, in the personal growth space, you may have seen this as well. There's a lot of there's a strong emphasis on almost like finding yourself. And even going back to many spiritual traditions, it's that question of who am I? What am I? And to me, this is work where, by virtue of deprogramming ourselves from the way in which we've been shaped by the people around us, the culture, just the way our world works, we connect more with what's actually here that wants to be expressed.
Yes. One thing I thought of as you were talking is just the quote of like, know thyself, right? How many theologians and and in the world of mindset, in the world of personal development, it is really about like knowing yourself. But I think this is taking that to a much deeper level of really knowing yourself, how you operate, how you work, what creates a positive response for you, what kind of touch, what kind of sensation, what kind of smells, what kind of sensory inputs, what is it that makes me regulated and relaxed and create better movement, like really knowing yourself at that deep sensory level. And then, yes, absolutely, as we start to deconstruct some of this stress and patterning that has accumulated over time, over our life, moving through the world, we do start to be able to feel ourselves better, to express ourselves better, to use our voice, to be present in relationship with other people, and show up more comfortable in our own skin because we're not in these states of chronic dysregulation, being really overly activated and then crashing and coming down, and never really being in that place where we're just in the present moment.
What you just shared brought up something that I'd really be interested in your take on, which is many of the approaches that we've been exposed to that are more common out there around how to develop in one way or another, whether it's leadership, whether it's emotion regulation, or it's expression and authenticity. And very commonly within the therapeutic world, there's this either implicit or often explicit idea that you're messed up and you got to get fixed because this whole thing you've got going on with like the different forms of different manifestations of the dysregulation, that is a sign that you are broken. My personal stance on that is no, that's a sign that your nervous system is operating as intended to a lot of challenges that it's being forced to navigate.
I couldn't agree more. I do a lot of work in the world of complex trauma. I have a podcast, Trauma Rewired. We talk a lot about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And we have taken the D off of CPTSD because we don't believe it's disordered. It's your nervous system actually functioning the way that it's meant to protect you. These are adaptive stress responses because of the experiences that you had. It was how your body, your brain, and your nervous system learned to keep you safe. And it worked to a certain extent because you're alive, right? And now these have just become the frequently occurring reactions that, again, our system is just relying on because it's what it knows because of our past experiences. And our brain's number one question is always, am I safe? And if the answer to that is no, we're going to start to move into stress responses. And that's what we're meant to do. And so until we can start to repattern and give our system new tools, like there's nothing broken about that. Your system is still adapting and changing and regulating as it should. It's really the experiences that are more messed up, and the society and all these other things. And then you just have to have a new way to work with the system to come into better balance, but not because you're broken, just because those experiences need to be repatterned.
Yeah. This is, I've come to believe, one of the most important, especially early messages that we need as we're embarking on a path such as this, because there's so much shame around all kinds of different manifestations of that dysregulation. And when that's there, it becomes very challenging to meet the reality of our experience. There's so much that we have to move through. And when we can recognize what you just described, and that this is the body working as it's intended to work. This is also not a I don't know, like a self-love quote on a poster. This is actually how our biology functions. This is not about just loving ourselves. This is about recognizing our nervous system has evolved over a very long period of time in order to be able to keep us alive, first and foremost.
Yeah. This is science.
And that means that's what it's optimized
Yeah.
for. And sometimes, often in our modern society, it gets stuck in that mode because we just don't have a shared understanding in our society of how to move through it and navigate it.
And removing some of that shame is so important, because, like you were saying, it's so often that we go into these different healing practices or coaching programs or mindset work or therapy, and we can't have the new experience or express the emotions or have the difficult conversation. And then there is such a big shame response that happens in the body. And again, all emotions are physiological. And so there is a lot going on in the body and the nervous system with shame. There's increased inflammation. There's restriction of the vocal cords. There's immobility in the diaphragm. So our breathing becomes restricted. There's changes to our immune system. Like, shame is a really big reaction in the body, and it reduces our mobility. And so if we're moving into that shame response all of the time, it's immobilizing us, it's harming our physical health, and then it's making it even more difficult to get the regulation that we need to create the safety to be able to do these other things. And that can just become a really big loop, especially if you have a really reactive shame response. If you're someone with CPTS, I mean, shame is something I've worked with a lot. And it's a long journey and a big process. And so it's really important for people to have this new perspective as an offering so that they can have a little more altitude. They can start to open the door for a little bit of self-compassion and just understand that this is how we're built. And that, you can find new tools to work with the system, but there's nothing wrong with you if that's happening.
Yeah. I think just a couple of those words that you just used to me are essential, which is learning how to work with the system. We're not trying to overwrite the system. We're not trying to override anything. We're learning how to work with our body's natural responses. And in so doing, develop a totally different relationship with our day-to-day experience of being in our body and having all the reactions. The reactions to the world between, let's say, the world around us and the world within us, that doesn't stop happening. It's that we learn how to navigate the charge that's always flowing through us, the way the world around us is always changing, the uncertainty that's always present to varying degrees in just not in normal life.
Yeah. Stress and dysregulation happens. It's always going to happen as we live in the world. And really, when we're talking about nervous system regulation, I think sometimes people think that it means being in this state of like being really calm or zen all of the time. And it's not really about that. It's about being able to modulate and have the appropriate amount of activation for the situation at hand, and then to be able to come down out of that activated state so that you can rest and recover and have the resources that you need to positively adapt to that stress. So I'm never looking for a flat line with nervous system regulation. I'm trying to be able to modulate better and more appropriately for the present moment. And I also think there's a lot of misconception about using nervous system regulation or neurosomatic tools to avoid the emotional experience. And that is definitely not the purpose of working with your nervous system. It is very healthy to be able to express your emotions. It's very important for our physical health, for our reactivity, for our mental health. And what we're really doing when we work with the nervous system is trying to mobilize the body, get good mobility, especially in those deep intrinsic muscles of the core, the diaphragm, in the vocal cords, to be able to work with our interoceptive system so we hear those signals from the body more and we can even feel what's happening and what emotions are going on inside, so that we can express our emotions, so that we can move that through the body and then have the experience of emotional regulation, which, like we talked about in the beginning, is a very physical process. And our body has to have the skill and the capacity to be able to do that. But we're not training our nervous system to not feel those emotions, and definitely not to try to override the emotional experience.
If we want to be able to express what we feel, we have to experience what we're feeling. And it can be very tempting, especially if we've had some challenging emotions in our lives. It can be very tempting to try and just selectively skip emotions, but we don't have that ability. And when we recognize that there's actually also value, it can be hard at first as we're rebuilding and regaining that capacity. But once we do, we can reconnect with the value that the full range of emotional experience has. And we don't really have to fear the parts of it that we've learned to turn away from.
It's the story of my life. I'm a kiddo with a high ACE score, and emotional repression was deeply reflexive for me for most of my life. I lived in my intellectual mind. If I could just understand everything, I could figure it out, I could be safe. And I didn't even understand what it meant to feel emotions, much less express them. And then I got to a point in my healing where I started to understand, okay, I want to start to be able to express. I want to be able to be with these emotions, because I know that emotions are on a spectrum and I want to have a full human experience. And so I want to be able to feel my anger and my grief, as well as my joy and my pleasure. And when I'm numbing some out, I'm numbing all of them out. And then I started trying to do that with somatic practices, and it was so challenging for me. My body would react in very protective ways. I would get rash and inflammation. I would dissociate very quickly. And it really started a long time of rehabilitating my interoceptive system, of remobilizing my body, of starting to be with emotional sensations for just a little bit of time in that like minimum effective dose, and then regulating around that to recreate safety so that I could eventually get to the point where like now I'm pretty solid at it. I can have a good scream in my car. I can have a good cry, but it was a process and a journey. But now I get to have this beautiful embodied life where I have so much deeper connection to others, to myself. I feel sensations, the wind and the sun and here. And it's a beautiful journey, but it's not an easy road always.
Yeah. I like to say life becomes higher resolution. We live in higher resolution. And once we experience that, we become teachers of this, because I would guess that many of us who are bringing this to others have somewhat similar origin stories. And it's a real journey that you go through, and you recognize, you kind of take a moment sometimes and look around and you're like, it doesn't have to be this way. We can be so much more connected, so much more peaceful, so much more alive.
Yes.
In our day-to-day.
Alive. It's this feeling of coming back to life and really being present in the world for the whole human experience. And I'm here for it, And I think there's it can also be really challenging too, because so many of our memories are implicit, right? Especially if we have big traumatic memories. They don't live as cognitive memories a lot of the times, especially if they happen during development, but they do exist in our body as sensations, as feelings. And so when we start to come back in and reconnect and try to feel those sensations, it can be very scary, it can be very overwhelming. Can lead to emotional flashbacks and dysregulation. And so there is a process there too of really being mindful of how we are, how quickly am I asking somebody to drop into their body? Am I teaching them the tools first to be able to regulate through that safely, to come back to themselves? And ways to work with their nervous system to be able to process the emotions differently so that it's not just repeating that same experience over and over again. And there's that's a journey too.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it in that direction, because this is something that I was wanting to explore with you. Because actually, just before you and I met in Austin, I was having a conversation with my friend Tanai about something that just so gets to me about what I hear often in the personal growth space, which is around these, what you can call the more cathartic experiences and highly intense releases. And I truly don't have anything against necessarily the modalities themselves, whether it's, plant medicine or different types of emotional processing, but the pushing to have the release, especially within a group that's often a new group and often without integration, it's just, this is very, very angering, if I'm frank. Like, this is because this does so much damage. So I'm curious to hear because I imagine some people listening will have had some of these experiences where they were encouraged to like access these parts of themselves that maybe they haven't before and get it all going. And some people have had what they would term positive experiences in these places. They may or may not be aware of some of the deeper impacts of this work. Other people are very much aware of it and have had to spend an inordinate amount of time and hardship kind of recovering from those experiences.
Yeah, I will straight up go there with you and saying it's dangerous. It's dangerous for some people. And like you said, some people have really great positive experiences, but for a lot of people, one, their nervous system doesn't have capacity going into that experience. They just are going in already in a really depleted, under-resourced, dysregulated state, and expecting their body to be able to process these huge emotional experiences when there are not the resources there to positively adapt to that experience. And so they come out with a lot of physical outputs of pain or migraine or other outputs like dissociation or being kind of stuck in that emotional state. They've been really thrust into a flashback state, an emotional somatic flashback state that they can't get out of. And also too, this is a big experience in the body of feeling maybe tremendous grief or abandonment or rage. And I haven't done anything before that to begin to make those signals safe for my body. So, I don't have any practice mobilizing those emotions, any practice responding differently. I've never had the experience of a different reaction to those sensations other than to go into a stress response, to go into fight or flight or freeze or complete dissociation and shutdown. And so now, how can I expect my body, my brain, and my nervous system to have a new reaction to something that I've never practiced having a new reaction to? It doesn't have the skill. And so I'm having this huge reaction, and it's going to push me into whatever the pattern already is in a really big way.
Yeah. Yeah. This is something that I think in a space where there isn't much of any regulation, we don't hear about this. And it's not as though we're, signing off on some of the risks up front, or that these things are being made clear to us, or that we even have the ground, the knowledge to ground what that kind of thing can mean and what it can look like. So people who are having these experiences are not necessarily going out and advertising, hey, I had this experience and it caused me months of hardship and harm. And so this is something I think is really important for more of us who are in the space to talk about openly, and to name that there is a responsible way of going about this and tailoring the experience to the individual and their nervous system, and what a gradual path of growth looks like.
Yeah.
Because the nervous system shifts, it changes gradually, not with the flip of a switch.
Yeah. I mean, people don't talk about it often, like you said, because they're in the throes of a really difficult experience and they probably do not want to talk about it publicly. But I will say that I work with many, many clients that after some of these peak somatic experiences end up in long-term states of depression, suicidal ideation, psychosis sometimes. And even for myself, I have had some peak somatic experiences, and I do believe in somatic experiences as a way to process and repattern and resolve trauma. And I did a lot of work with my nervous system prior to those experiences to have capacity to work on my different sensory input skills, to work on my skills of emotional regulation um, and expression. And then I have a long practice after of integrating the experience and working directly with my nervous system little by little every day to take new action in the direction of the insights, to keep creating regulation and safety around the things that are coming up, to just keep working to repattern. And that can be years sometimes of integrating an experience gradually and a little bit strategically as I move through my neurotraining.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of those moments where I think about, like, from someone, the perspective of someone listening, it could sound like, whoa, like this sounds like a lot. This is how long is it going to take for me to see any benefit, especially in our culture where it's like everywhere I go, somebody's selling me some quick fix. Maybe I'll just try a few of those first. But what I found in this work is that actually, even though the shifts are gradual in nature, the impact on our lived experience is actually quite significant from early on in the work, because we're developing a relationship with ourselves that we just don't ever learn how to have. It's like suddenly there's more to all of this that I can connect with, and I can live through my body more fully, as opposed to having so much of my experience be on automatic.
It can seem very overwhelming. And I always like to remind people you can start with just a little practice, just a couple minutes a day, and it really compounds on itself. It's kind of like interest in a savings account. The more you work with your nervous system, the more capacity you have, the more you can add on to that, the more it expands. And I think too, a lot of times people come to the work because of specific outputs. I mean, it was really for me binge eating. I've been a binge eater my whole life, and it was really painful. And it was also the best way that my nervous system knew how to regulate and get the interoceptive stimulus that it needed. And I can see now it was really protecting me, even as a kid, from being under too much stress for too long. But it had reached a point where, like, yeah, it was really painful in my life. And I started really diving into the work as a way to address that. And I will say, over time, and again, this is a little bit more gradual, but it's a little more rapid with that specific output. Like, the binges got fewer and further between. And now I really can't tell you the last time I've even thought about it, right? So that kind of stuff happens. And what's also going on is, as I'm rehabilitating my nervous system, like you said, it starts to trickle out into every single area of my life. My relationships start to change. My relationship to myself changes. I become more embodied. I can express more emotions. And then more things unfold, right? Deeper insights, deeper things to work through as I have more capacity, as I have more awareness and presence. And so it really does become a lifelong journey of working with the nervous system, rehabilitating it, creating new inputs, repatterning things, and then letting life expand. And then I get to that new level of expansion, and there's more to work with, and it just goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're describing that, I'm seeing the Buckminster Fuller idea of the trim tab, and this small part of the ship that just has the ability to change the whole course, the whole direction of the entire ship. And that's really what nervous system work is. when we're approaching it in this way, because it is the entire filter through which we interact with life.
Everything changes. Everything changes. And you become more aware of the things that maybe, you're looking at the output, the pain, the migraine, the binging, the substance originally. And then as you start to go deeper, you see, oh man, I have all these patterns of fawning in my relationships. I don't set good boundaries. Oh, I'm really disconnected from myself. I self-abandon in these places. And that awareness, it comes with more capacity too. And then it just gets deeper.
Yeah, especially when we recognize those things, but not only from that cognitive perspective, but we actually sense when these things are happening. And it eventually gets to the point where we sense something and we don't even know what we're sensing, but then we can make sense of like, what is this somatic experience actually telling me? What is this felt sense experience revealing to me? Where it just translates to everything, as you're saying.
Yeah, I think for me, that's been the biggest gift of working with my nervous system, is reconnecting to my intuition and my instinct, and then being able to have the capacity to align my life more with those signals, so that, again, my whole life is changing, but just that ability to feel what it is that I really need, want, desire, and then take action in that direction is monumental for changing.
Yeah. So, Elisabeth, as I've mentioned to you, one thing that I like to ask everybody who I speak to on this podcast is about a personal practice that you like to share that supports you in all of these different ways that we're talking about today. What kind of practice would you be inspired to share if somebody's curious about what they could experiment with?
Yeah. So do you want to actually walk through like a little practice?
Sure.
Okay. So since we've talked a lot about emotional expression, I really started out with like a 30-second emotional experiencing practice where I could make it at a capacity that my nervous system felt safe with. And I did it little by little, but I did it every day. So I would do one or two things to just help me get into my body. So that might be like some sensory stimulus for my feet, just mapping for my brain where my feet are in space. Might be a little bit of impact on my bones, hitting my, arms, my legs, my ribs with just loose fists, giving my bones some impact. Maybe some gentle tongue exercises or cranial nerve stuff, just anything to help me really get into my body. And then I started with grief because it was kind of an easy, more tangible one. So I would just think about a place where there was a change in my life, because wherever there's a change, there's a loss of some sort, right? Even if it was as simple as like I changed a habit, there's like this version of me that's different that I don't have anymore. Maybe it changed something about my relationship with my partner or a friend, or I would just think about the change. And I would just put my hands on my heart. I would set a timer because I am kind of a technical person, for like 30 seconds. And I would just breathe and drop into my body for just a little bit and see what sensations I could feel. Maybe dialogue with my body a little bit. How do you want me to be with you? What do you need from me? Is there anything that needs to be expressed? Maybe a sound would come out, like a or a movement. And then when the timer would go off, I would say, okay. And I would shake around a little bit. I would do a couple more neuro tools that I know are really high payoff for me. It could be a breathing exercise, a visual exercise, anything that I know my nervous system responds really well to, so that I'm creating regulation and safety around that. And then I go on about my day, and it takes probably about 5 minutes, but it's just this gradual reconnection. And then over time, I would expand that, and I would play with different emotions, disgust or anger or jealousy or shame, and let the whole spectrum start to unfold.
Yeah. What I love about what you're describing is that there's really not much excess mental effort that's needed. It's more about just sensing physically what's there and giving yourself some external stimulus to support the awareness and connecting with the physical, and then just basically practicing that curiosity of what sensation is here.
Don't have to understand it. Doesn't have to be right or justified. It's just a sensation. Maybe it wants to be expressed. I'm in a safe place to express it. And then I can just move on about my day.
Yeah. And I feel like that concept is going to be in part 2, whenever that happens, around, I don't actually have to make sense of this. I don't actually have to understand it, which is so revelatory in the landscape of therapeutics and growth that we've talked about. That's a whole other story that I'm sure we could get into.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Elisabeth, what's the best way for people to learn more about you, your work, and connect with you?
Well, if you're an individual who just wants to learn these tools and work on your own nervous system, you can join us at brainbase.com. You can get 2 free weeks of neurotraining there. See how it resonates for your body. We do emotional expression and all that good stuff. And then if you're a practitioner, we also have a professional certification at neurosomaticintelligence.com. That is an accredited course for people to bring nervous system work into whatever other healing modality they do.
If you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend checking out Elisabeth's work. It's excellent, some of the best I've found, and you can get started right away. Even if it seems like a lot, there's an easy entry point. Elisabeth, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor to have this conversation.
I hope this was helpful for you. Please share your feedback with me. Find me on LinkedIn. And please leave a review. Share this with a friend. Let's bring more people into the conversation around working with feeling at the root of all the growth, all the evolution we're going for. It starts with feeling.